Hi everyone, it's Amy here from the blog I Think Therefore I Teach. Welcome to your next philosophy instalment. This one goes right back to the beginning and we start with Plato. So let me make myself smaller. Oh, not that small. Get up the PowerPoint. Right, here we go. So, ancient philosophical influences then, Plato, one of my favourites. What I get my class to do right at the beginning is I introduce them to their first new key word, which is epistemology. Anything with an ology means study of. So epistemology is the study of knowledge. Sociology, study of society. Psychology, study of the mind or the brain. And so these are or the psyche. So these are the, anything epistemology or ology is the study of. So epistemology is the study of knowledge. It focuses on evaluating claims people make when they say they know something. So this is a really good place to start on philosophy, full stop. Questioning everything that you think you already know, because believe me, philosophy is going to change that. So I get my class to first of all discuss in pairs what they think knowledge is, what is the difference between knowledge and opinion and belief, and if you know something, does that mean that you are certain about it, and is knowledge really possible? And then we share and discuss these ideas as a class. There's obviously no right or wrong answer for this, but it really takes apart what we believe to know, what we believe to be facts, what we believe to be true, and really look at the language that we use, which is so important on your time on philosophy. So there are two types of epistemology that we will study and really look at on this course. The first is rationalism. Rationalism uses reason to gain knowledge. So this is straight to your brain. This is the reason element. An argument that is therefore created prior to or before senses is known as a priori, as in prior to the use of senses, based purely on reason. An argument is a priori. You can't be an a priori person. You create an a priori argument. A rationalist epistemology then claims that knowledge, as opposed to opinion, is. Now, let me just stop first of all and say that rationalist epistemology sounds really wordy, really complicated. It's not. It sounds really fancy, but actually all it means is rationalist using reason, epistemology, study of knowledge. You are using your reason to gain knowledge. That's what that means. What they do or what they claim is that it's self-evident. Whether you know it or not, it is self-evident. You don't need to prove it. They're like dictionary definitions. They just are. So very much like maths. Maths is a rationalist epistemology. Since experience cannot provide the certainty we are needed to guarantee that what we claim to know is true. So I get my class to discuss at this point what may be wrong with senses. Why are senses not that great? So by senses I mean our five senses, our sight, our hearing, our sense of smell, our taste, our touch. Why might they be deceiving? If they are our source of gaining knowledge, why might that go wrong? And obviously some of the answers people might say is that senses are very subjective, senses may not always work or not work very well. People's senses are different. So for example, I have to wear glasses because my eyesight isn't very good. So people are colourblind, so a colour they see is different from a colour somebody else sees. So we're basing our whole knowledge on our senses, yet our senses are quite flawed. And so this approach, rationalism, says no, we are not going to use senses, we're going to go straight to our reason. So like mathematicians, we rely on reason, in Latin ratio, itself as the basis for determining whether our opinions are justified true beliefs or knowledge. Plato is an example of a rationalist. He says that sense experience fails to provide us with a guarantee that what we experience is in fact true. The information we get by relying on sense experience is constantly changing and often unreliable. On the other side, you have empiricism. Empiricism gains knowledge through senses. This therefore becomes a posteriori, or as in post senses, after senses. So again, an argument is an a posteriori argument. An empirical epistemology claims that knowledge is based on sense experience, refers to the use of working hypotheses that can be tested using observation and experiment. Aristotle, who we're going to come across in our next video, is an empiricist. So Aristotle and Plato have extremely different approaches to the way that they gain knowledge. Right, so let's meet Plato. We first of all start with Heraclitus. Heraclitus was another fellow Greek philosopher. He questioned, can you step in the same river twice? So I get my students to say, what do you think he means and do you agree? And the crux of this is the idea that whilst you can step in the same river, as in I'm stepping in the Thames, for example, you will never step in exactly the same river because the water is constantly flowing and changing. And so for Plato, that was absolutely key. Everything in this world changes. And so Plato, like Heraclitus, believed that everything in this world changes, and therefore there must be another world, a world that does not change. This world Plato called the world of forms. Please make sure you use your capital letters appropriately. Now, he based this on the logic of opposites. The logic of opposites exists in pretty much everything, that everything has an opposite, the positive, negative, hot, cold, summer, winter, old, young, everything has an opposite, good, bad, everything has an opposite for it to make sense. So for Plato, he thought, well, if this world changes, there must be an opposite, there must be a world that does not change. So the forms, everything we experience in this world is a vague shadow of what it really is. It's not real. This world is not real. Everything we experience is an imitation. It's a copy of the forms. The forms is the word or the name that Plato gave to explain the things, the concepts that are in this separate world. So there is a separate second world, the world of forms. So the nature of forms. There are many types of beauty in this world. So we have lots of examples of beauty. For example, on my PowerPoint, Daniel Craig and Jennifer Lopez could be classed as examples of beauty. But the reason why we might recognise them as types of beauty is because they conform or match in some way. There's something about them that you would class as beautiful, and that's because they conform or match the form of beauty. There is one form of beauty in this other world, and what we get are reflections or echoes or shadows from this idea of beauty. And then some people have more of that form of beauty in them, making them more beautiful. You have forms for everything. You have forms of justice and love and truth and honesty. And so these are the ideas that the more truthful you are, the more you represent that concept, that form of truth, that form of justice. But everything we have in this world constantly changes. It develops, it dies, even our understandings of beauty change. But that's because of the impressions that we get. The form never ever changes. All that changes is what we experience. So for Plato, this is the true form of beauty that exists in the world of forms. Plato says that the particulars, so a particular beautiful person, we experience the particulars are imperfect copies still. Of course they're imperfect because they will change, they will die, they will get plastic surgery and facelifts. Everything in our world is imperfect still. And so these particulars sharing or participate, they are still part of the form. They participate in the form. Some things participate to a greater or lesser extent. So everything in this world, this is the world of appearances. They appear beautiful, they appear just, they appear good, but they're only appearances. Why? Because these things change. Sometimes you're never going to be truly perfect, truly honest. These things only appear at that time to be like that. And we know that our beauty comes and goes. Our beauty changes over culture and time and personal opinion. What you might think is beautiful, somebody else might think it isn't. But the thing is that if you said to somebody, gosh, isn't that man beautiful? Or gosh, isn't that girl beautiful? Your friend might say, no, they're not, but they still understand what you are talking about. They still understand the concept of beauty, even if their subjective opinion says that person isn't beautiful. So that means that the form itself is what gives us that understanding, even if we see it in lots of different ways. So a few key words for you then. The world of forms or the know-it-on. Think of this like knowing. It's the world of knowledge. A form itself is the perfect expression of something that never changes. Make sure you get your definition of a form right. So form always capital F, and it's an expression, it's a concept, it's an ideal. Just saying it's perfect isn't it's a description, not the actual definition of it. This world based on senses is the horaton, phenomena, stuff. Think of it like horrible horaton. This is the world of senses that Plato does not like or agree with. Sense experiences create illusions. What you see, what you think is, you see or smell or touch or taste, you think is real, but it's not, it's an illusion. And because we believe everything our senses tell us, this is ignorance. Because we believe it, we are ignorant, and this is known as icasia. The numbers are of no relevance, it's just to help you and my students with their notes. So epistemology, as we know, is the study of knowledge. Episteme then is when you achieve that true knowledge of the forms. Once you've gained that true knowledge of the other world and the forms, you've gained episteme. For Plato, this is via reason, not sense experience. And so this means Plato's argument is a priori, an argument based on reason, not senses, sense experience or empirical knowledge. So the qualities of the forms then, they're perfect, they're ideal, one and only. You can't have multiple perfect forms of justice because, well, which one's more perfect than the other then? How can you have multiple? No, you have one perfect, only original idea. More real than what we experience. They are eternal, fixed truths. They remain the same for all people and all places. So, for example, beauty, the concepts of beauty have changed over the years. You know, what Victorians thought were beautiful or what the Egyptians thought were beautiful was very different. But the concept of beauty, what beauty actually means, stays the same. It's unchanging because it's a concept. It's not physical. It's not something that has... it's not like a perfect form of a dog that has ears and a tail. No, it's the concept of that thing. The form is not a shape, but the essence. And this is why we experience things in our world. If there was no form, then we would not get it in our world. Our world, everything is constantly changing, evolving and dying. Only a shadow or echo of the real true form. Everything in this world matches or conforms. And so what we get are imitations. I always tell my students, or remember it as PPI, particulars, participate, imitate. We have particular examples that participate to a greater or lesser extent, and they imitate, they copy the forms. Just like an echo or a shadow. The shadow is still you, it's just your shadow. An echo is still your voice, it's just distorted in some way. Plato calls the things in our world particulars. They participate or are part of the form. Once again, the numbers are not of relevance. It's just to help you structure your notes. So what Plato argues is when there are so many forms of every single thing is in existence, there must be the ultimate form, the form of forms. The supreme form is for Plato the form of the good. This is because everything has goodness in it. You can't describe beauty or justice or truth without goodness. So these are the ideas that Plato was interested in. He wasn't interested in, for example, the form of a cat. That was of no interest to him. He was interested in the big things, the things that have meaning like justice and truth and beauty. And so for Plato, they can't be the ultimate form of forms because not everything has beauty in it, not everything has justice in it, but everything has goodness in it. All this perfection flows down from the form of good, so all the forms have goodness in them. And it's the source and reason for all of the forms. In the Allegory of the Cave, which I'll talk about in a second, the form of the good is symbolised by the sun. The sun illuminates outside the cave. It makes it visible, makes you able to see the forms. So it's the source and reason for the other forms, but it also illuminates. It makes possible for us to see and experience the other forms. It is the ultimate end in itself. The form of the good is the episteme. It's that knowledge of everything. Why? Because it illuminates all forms. So therefore it's the knowledge. It gives you that knowledge you need. And so this is the hierarchy of forms. This is for Plato what he focused on. He focused, of course, on the form of the good at the top, and then the universal qualities. Three most important universal qualities for Plato were justice, truth, and beauty. Underneath are other concepts and ideals, so this might be humour, the perfect form of humour. Underneath then are the forms of physical living objects, so the form of a human, the form of an animal, and at the bottom, the forms of inanimate objects, like the perfect form of a table, for example. Don't forget, these are not a table with 2 legs, 4 legs. This is the idea of the concept of a table itself. Now, you might think, how can you have a concept of a dog or a horse? It's the definition of them, though. It's what they are. And Plato, you could use the example of a child. A child knows the difference inherently between a dog and a horse. You might show them different pictures of dogs, but they don't go, that's a horse or that's a cow. No, they just know it. They know what are horses, they know what cows are, they know what sheep are, and that's because of the concept that they understand. I'll come back to that again in a second. So for Plato, he said that only a philosopher can escape the world of appearances, this world, as how it appears. It appears real, it's not. And with their reason, see the forms that lie behind the appearances. They are the true leaders of society. Well, of course they are, because Plato wanted to lead society. Plato is opposed to using senses or empiricism, as they cloud our judgment and our understanding. So the question is, and it's a rhetorical question, but you could use it as part of your evaluation. How on earth do you turn off your thought? How do you turn off your senses? How do you get this true knowledge of the forms? Come on then, Plato, explain it to me. I want to gain episteme. How on earth do I gain knowledge of the forms? What he says is, you are born, each and every one of us is born with a dim recollection of the forms. We all have knowledge of the forms. How is that possible? What Plato says is that we have an immortal soul. If you remember, if you did Socrates, you might have covered Socrates already. Socrates was Plato's teacher, and he was very insistent on the idea of the immortal quest of the soul. For them, it was very, very important and very key to their arguments that the soul that every single person has is eternal. It exists forever. So your soul will go on living forever, even when your body dies. And so your souls go to the world of forms, WOF, world of forms, before reincarnation. So this is known as metempsychosis. So I'm just going to go through the rest of this slide, and then I'm going to go back through it with you. When you are back in a physical body, you are ruled once again by your senses. The memory is only dim of the forms. But Plato believed that because people know the basis of truth, justice, beauty, without being taught, this is the soul's recollection of truth, of the forms using reason. We do not learn new things. Instead, education is a matter of remembering and recalling the world of forms. And this remembering back in a physical body is known as anamnesis. So what Plato believes is that each of us has a soul. When our body dies, our senses die. Our souls are then free to go back to the world of forms. So we experience the world of forms. We gain that true knowledge of this world. We then get sucked back or reincarnated back into a physical body. And so for a time, we listen to our souls. Children know good and bad and dogs from horses. We know this because we've experienced the true knowledge, the true forms. But then over time, we start to listen back to our senses once more. Certainly when you start school at the age of 4 or 5, you can't talk about this knowledge that you've got, the forms. You have to, you smell fire. You're taught to smell fire. You feel the heat. You smell gas. You can see danger. You're taught these things. You're taught to rely upon your senses. And so we slowly block out our souls. Our souls inside us say, no, listen to me. But our senses come forth. Our senses take over, and we start to believe what our senses tell us. So you need to block out your senses. And if you can remember the world of forms in this life, in this world, in this physical body, you listen to your soul. That's known as anamnesis. You're remembering the forms back in a physical body. And so I always finish with this quote. One of Plato's critics said, I see particular horses, but not hoarseness. To which Plato replied sharply, that is because you have eyes, but no intelligence. What Plato... Sorry, folks. For Plato, his critic is saying, I see particular horses, as in particulars. Well, I see a particular horse, but where's its hoarseness? Where's its concept of horse? And what Plato replies is, it's because you have eyes. You're seeing horses, but you're not using your intelligence to understand the hoarseness, the concept behind it. The things that are missing off this PowerPoint that you'll probably have explored with your teachers, or you can find lots of it online as well, is you need to start learning how to evaluate these. This will only get you, this PowerPoint will only get you so far on the course. You need to be able to evaluate, get a line of argument. Do you agree with Plato or not? What are the problems with his argument? What works? What doesn't work? And so you can start developing your evaluative tone through being critical about what you have just heard there. The other thing that's missing is the analogy of the cave. Now, this is because I do it practically with my students. I get them to do some different activities with it, but there's lots of things online for the analogy or the allegory of the cave, exactly the same thing. But I will quickly go through it with you now anyway. So what I'll do is I'll cancel this down and make myself bigger while I talk through the cave. That's better. So with the analogy of the cave, first of all, the analogy is a comparison between similar things. It's really important that you know the meaning of an analogy. So an analogy compares similar things. In this case, it's the cave to outside the cave. It's very similar to this world and the world of forms. So understanding the meaning of an analogy is very important for future, because when we look at people like Paley, who does the analogy of the watch, if you can actually take apart the analogy and say, actually, those things are not similar, then the arguments often fall apart. So it's a good thing to bank for the future. So Plato's analogy of the cave, you'll realise that many philosophers use analogies or stories or metaphors to help explain their arguments. And it's really good to get these in your essays and your work. The analogy of the cave is very straightforward. Basically, this is the story. You have 3 prisoners chained by their necks and their feet in a cave, and they've been there their whole lives, their whole existence. Everything they understand is in this cave, and they're facing a wall. They cannot move their heads because their heads are chained. They can't move their legs, or they can't turn around or anything like that. They are chained facing this wall, and on this wall are cast shadows, and these shadows are cast because there is a walkway and a fire behind them, but they don't know that. And on that walkway there are walkers that go across it carrying all sorts of things on their head or having conversations, and they cast the shadows on that wall. And so the prisoners think, oh, it's the shadows, they're talking, they're real, they're existing, they're carrying things. And so they think that's their reality. They think that's true and real. What happens one day is one of the prisoners' chains breaks by what is called the instructor in the original text. And this prisoner makes a painful journey out of the cave. He's basically dragged out of this cave by the instructor and makes this painful journey to outside the cave. And then outside the cave, the prisoner's like, whoa, my reality isn't real. What I experienced my whole life is not real. There is a world outside the cave. And then he's blinded by the sun which illuminates everything outside, and he gains knowledge of the world outside the cave. And so he races back in the cave to tell his other 2 prisoners, look what I've seen, look what I know, this isn't real. But he kind of stumbles and falls, and his eyes adjust, and he's kind of gibbering along, and all the prisoners see are these shadows talking again on the wall, and they say, no, go away, don't release us, don't hurt us. And so they reject the prisoner that returned, and so the prisoner has to leave them there. And so that's the story. Now, the story isn't the important bit. The symbolism is what you need to know. So my advice is, in an essay, only explain the story extremely quickly, or focus heavily on the symbolism as you tell the story. The symbolism and the original text are key. My advice is make sure you have a look at the original text of Analogy of the Cave. It's quite a simple story, to be honest with you. If you've ever read Shakespeare or a bit from the Bible, Plato's Analogy of the Cave is easy. So get a few bits from the original text, even just words like, it doesn't call it a cave, it calls it the den, or the instructor that takes them out, or the fact that they're chained from their necks and their ankles. So get some little bits of information, because it'll really, an examiner will know that they're from the original text. The symbolism is kind of twofold. There's twofold to the symbolism of the story. In a nutshell, the cave is our world. Outside the cave is the world of forms, or the noaton. The chains can symbolise either the body or our senses. The shadows are what we believe are real. The walkers on the walkway symbolise the politicians in our world that are spreading the shadows, that are spreading the illusions, that are spreading the icasia that we have. think that's pretty much senses, walkers, shadows, the cave. When the chains break, that's either the breaking of the senses, as in you're gaining knowledge, or it's the dying of the body, that your body's dying, and therefore the escaped prisoner is either just your soul leaving the body, or it's the, you know, your reason coming through and taking over your senses. The painful journey out of the cave is the journey of epistemology, because it's not easy turning off your senses and using your reason. So it's the painful journey out of the cave is epistemology. Outside the cave is the world of forms. The sun is, of course, the form of the good that illuminates all other forms. So that's episteme. Outside the cave, as I said, is the world of forms. The running back into the cave to tell the other prisoners could either be seen as Socrates trying to teach us the way, and we reject Socrates, or it could even be reincarnation, the soul coming back into the physical world and again getting rejected, so the soul coming back into that physical body in reincarnation, with the prisoner remembering what he's experienced through anamnesis. So there's many ways of interpreting the story, and you could even take it further than that and see it in other ways, but those are kind of the basics. Don't think I missed anything off that. No, I think that's pretty much covered it. So if you enjoyed this video or found it helpful, please do subscribe, then you won't ever miss a video. And also, if you've got any questions or comments or points about Plato, please do feel free to comment underneath, because it's always nice to hear from you all. Otherwise, thanks very much for watching, everybody. Bye for now.